So I have got an incredible soft spot for the Sega Mega Drive. It is without a doubt my favourite system. I know I do talk a lot about the Sega Saturn, about the Atari Jaguar, but the Mega Drive is like the system I had for the most part growing up as a kid. I went from the Atari 2600, which I had as a younger child, the Mega Drive for a good bunch of years there in primary school, and then onto the PlayStation. So that was like kind of my progress, but I definitely remember the Mega Drive the fondest, and I spent a hell of a lot of time playing this system. So when I got a question about Mega Drive collecting, I decided to make a video talking about it. Because I think everyone's got their own criteria when it comes to judging what games to add to their collection. And it is a pretty interesting conversation when you think about the collections that we have are curated. Like, we pick out the games that we want to show off and display, and we all have our own reasons for collecting. So in this video, I thought I'd just break down some of my own reasons and talk about some of my favorite games that I've been able to add to my collection. And unfortunately, I'm not going to dive into like where to find games or the best prices to pay for games. I think that's just a little bit too volatile. But I'll talk about why I've collected some of the games I have and what makes them really special to me. So in no particular order, actually I think I'll go the most important thing that I look for when it comes to collecting video games, and that goes for all of them here in the games room, is multiplayer. So these old consoles, I think they are fantastic for sitting down next to someone else, plugging in a cartridge, plugging in two controllers, and sitting there and playing it together. And I think that's one thing that newer systems just don't seem to do as well. A lot of games are geared for that online experience. They're not exactly designed to be sat down in the same room as the person you're playing with. So multiplayer games score incredibly highly on my list, and one incredibly iconic Mega Drive multiplayer game is ToeJam and Earl. It is a cooperative game where you play as an alien looking for spaceships on Earth. It's quirky, it's fun, it's full of humor, and yeah, like I said, it's a cooperative game. So finding a good cooperative multiplayer game is hard, and ToeJam and Earl sit incredibly high on my list of favorite games ever. Talking about cooperative co-op, you've also got games like Two Crude Dudes. I'm pretty sure this is a Sega exclusive. I'd have to double check. I didn't really do my research before sitting down. But that is a fantastic side-scrolling style beat-em-up. You don't have... So it's like a flat ground. You don't have like that fake isometric 3D. So it's a hell of a lot of fun, and you can pick up and use any item that you find in the level, like cars, signposts, rocks and boulders. Everything is up for grabs to use as a weapon. And talking about side-scrolling beat-em-ups, you've also got Streets of Rage 1, 2, and 3 over on the Mega Drive. These were the Sega highest standard of side-scrolling beat-em-ups. You are going to find other side-scrolling beat-em-ups for the platform. Actually, talking about side-scrolling beat-em-ups, we also had Toxic Crusaders. So this has been, Retroware have been working on a new version of the Toxic Crusaders video game. They've made a lot of noise about it, but it also came out for the Mega Drive. So this is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that does support 2 players. Nowhere near as polished as Streets of Rage, but cooperative beat-em-up right there. And, you know, there's obviously a bunch of games that I'm not going to cover in this review, but that's one of my key criteria. is multiplayer. After that, obviously, you do have like the unique factor. Did it come out exclusively to the Mega Drive? Or if it's not exclusive, what makes the Mega Drive version unique compared to the other releases of it? So you've got games that have come out everywhere, but on the Mega Drive, the graphics might be different, the graphics might be better, they might be worse. Maybe there's a different like play style that's been included. I don't know if I have any like solid examples of a game that is better on the what am I looking for? Oh, there it is. So I don't know if I have any solid examples of a game that came out better with a direct port on a different system to compare it to right here on hand. But what I do have are games like Beavis and Butthead. So this came out on the Sega Mega Drive, and then a different version was released on the Super Nintendo. A different version again was released on the Game Gear. So 3 unique titles, but they all kind of came out at the same time doing the same thing. So on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Mega Drive, we got a cooperative multiplayer Beavis and Butthead title. And this one does have elements of like a point and click adventure. You have to find the right items to use in the right places, in the right sequence to progress through the levels. And I just love the humor in this game as well. And I think games that can bring a sense of humor, you don't see like a whole lot of it, but the games that do it really well really stand out. So Beavis and Butthead is an example of a game that, even though, yeah, there's not a direct port on a different system, there are Beavis and Butthead games that came out around the same time, and the Mega Drive version really stood out for me. Hyperstone Heist. So this is like the Mega Drive equivalent to Turtles in Time. So again, it's not a direct port. It doesn't have a direct port on the Super Nintendo. It's going to be hard to compare Turtles in Time to Hyperstone Heist. But I think I did over when I reviewed Hyperstone Heist years and years and years and years ago. But it is a really solid side-scrolling cooperative beat-em-up. So it does have that unique element to it. You are fighting, it's multiplayer, it's a hell of a lot of fun. And you can't talk about Hyperstone Heist without talking about Tournament Fighters. So Tournament Fighters, again, a bit like Beavis and Butthead. Tournament Fighters was released on the Super Nintendo, but the Super Nintendo and the Mega Drive version here, again, are both different games with the same name released around the same time. So it's not like a direct apples to apples comparison, but we do have a unique version for the Mega Drive. So, uniqueness rates right up there with multiplayer, and I do have games that are unique without having any multiplayer at all. So some examples of that would be The Haunting, starring Poltergeist. This is a game that I absolutely adore. It's beautiful to look at, and it's one of those games that you can swap the controller quite easily back and forth with someone that you're sitting down with. And I've done that with my son in the past as well, because you do tend to die a little bit, end up in hell, and then when you come back to Earth, you can swap the controller over. So I have reviewed this game here on the channel. Well worth checking out if you're a fan of some of that unique Electronic Arts video gameplay. But it's a really fun game, and it lets you, again, I feel like I've spoken about being able to, have humor in a video game, but The Haunting does a really good job of it, as well as you haunt different household items and try and scare the occupants living in the house, the Sardini family. So highly, highly recommended. A very unique game for the Mega Drive. And of course you've got your Sega exclusives. So I'm talking about games like Shinobi, the Sonic series. I've grabbed Sonic 3D Blast because I want to talk about that in a second. Shadow Dancer is like a part of the Shinobi series. And look, there's a whole bunch of other unique Mega Drive titles. Afterburner, so that's obviously a port from the arcade version. I don't know if Shinobi had how many versions of Shinobi ended up in the arcades as well, or what was made exclusive for consoles. I feel like I'm talking a lot. So, Sonic 3D Blast, I pulled this one out of the collection to talk about because it does show off what the Mega Drive was capable of. So after multiplayer and after uniqueness, technical ability. So I do want games in my collection that show off what these systems are capable of doing. And for me, Sonic 3D Blast is a good example of showing off what the Mega Drive is capable of doing. It has some beautiful CGI cutscenes. I kind of touch on it when I do my Sonic R review. But talking about games that are, you know, technically quite beautiful, there's also like Bloodshot was a find in the last... It's probably like 5 years ago now that I've discovered Bloodshot, but this is a 3D shooting game for the Sega Mega Drive that supports local cooperative multiplayer as well as deathmatch. So it does it all, but it does it all at like 5 to 10 frames per second. So actually playing the game isn't very smooth, but it does do a fantastic job of showing off what the Mega Drive was capable of doing and giving us a good look at how good those graphics, even though it's dark, even though it's choppy, what those graphics can do in like a ray casting 3D game. So, Bloodshot was a really fun find, and I think it got a different title over in the States, but definitely worth checking out the review on that to find out all about what Bloodshot looks like, what it can do, how it functions. I'm kind of getting down to the end of my list here. So, Blades of Vengeance I pulled out because it's a really fun, again, it's a cooperative multiplayer title, developed by EA. It has you playing as a wizard, a warrior, or a rogue, like assassin type character. I remember playing this one hell of a lot with my brothers. Comes highly recommended. I also had Wrestle War. As far as fighting games go, a wrestling game is always a bit of fun. It's got a bit of button mashing built in, a few different moves, and a couple of fun characters to pick between. So, recommend picking this one up if you are after a good competitive multiplayer title. I knew I'd mess that up at some point. And finally, I've also been using Art Alive a hell of a lot. So Art Alive isn't a game, it's more like an application that lets you create art on your Mega Drive. And I've used it, out of all of my Mega Drive games, this one's definitely seen like the most action in the last couple of years. I've actually been working on developing a whole online exhibition using artwork designed completely in Art Alive, captured from original hardware through a computer and presented online in this digital exhibition called As Seen on TV. So I'll leave links to that down below if you are interested, but I think the productivity software, it's kind of a unique, it's a unique piece of software for the Mega Drive. And when it comes to video game systems, having those titles that do something different, so on the, so like for the PlayStation, we had games like Music 2000 that let you create your own music tracks. I found that really exciting, and I still use it to create music occasionally today. And then you've also got like art programs for the Super Nintendo. But yes, Art Alive on the Mega Drive. I'll leave a link down below if you're curious to check out what those pieces look like. But there's also videos right here on the channel where I do art on Art Alive, and there's a couple of them out there. And I also grabbed just Mutant League Football because sports games. There are some great sports games for these systems, and I think sports games work really well for these retro systems because they are simple, they are easy to pick up and play, The rules are easy to understand from the get-go. And for a lot of these games, I don't have any rules at all. It's just like, you get the ball, you run forward. Speedball's a great example of a sports game for the system that is multiplayer. You've got Mutant League Football, NBA Jams on basically everything, as well as, oh yeah, back here. I don't know how many other systems this game came out on, but Rugby World Cup 95, probably not going to be everyone's go-to sports game, but I have a hell of a lot of fun. I used to play rugby in high school, so at least I know the rules, and I do enjoy the sport and the game. Having the rugby game from 1995, it controls and plays really well. Some of the rugby games that came out a little bit later on the PlayStation 2. I really like that first rugby game that they did. I don't know if I've got one close by now. But, you know, there's been other rugby games and they have been a little bit hit or miss for me. So, World Cup Rugby 95. I feel like I've derailed this whole conversation a little bit. So, the three criteria that I have for collecting here, my Mega Drive collection, is really based around, is it multiplayer? And if it is multiplayer, cooperative above competitive? Is it a title that pushes the system, and is it unique for the system? And like, it doesn't really take any particular order. Multiplayer is pretty much the important one, and then everything else in different grades and scales. But yeah, if a game can like tick those boxes or most of those boxes, there's a good chance I'm going to want to get a copy of it somehow. And everything else in the collection is just kind of being a little bit accidental. Sometimes I do go out of my way to pick up a game just because I love the franchise. So The Simpsons is a good example of that. The Beavis and Butthead game I picked up because I love Beavis and Butthead. It just so happened that it did tick so many of those boxes, being, you know, unique and cooperative multiplayer. So yeah, collecting, I think it's a hell of a lot of fun, but at the end of the day, the biggest rule is to get games that you like and you enjoy playing. That doesn't probably need to be said, but maybe it is easy to go after games that seem prestigious online, or games that you think people will, you know, admire you for owning. But if you're not interested in the game, if you're not going to play it, I don't really see a point storing it. And I guess as I've gotten older and these video games and these systems are getting older, I'm starting to think more and more about the longevity of these systems, of these consoles, of these games, of the plastics, of the materials. I'm starting to, you know, get a little bit worried about how long these circuit boards are going to last for. How long is it going to take for the components inside the systems to start breaking down? How long will it be until, you know, capacitors have to get replaced for the systems back here that use capacitors? There's just, I can see a whole lot of maintenance and a whole lot of work is going to start accumulating when it comes to these retro collections, and you don't want that kind of responsibility and effort if you are storing and looking after these things that don't mean a whole lot to you. If you're just doing it because it's a fun hobby and you want people to admire you for how big and vast your collection is. So with that quick little rant over, I guess this is my video response to how would you go about, I can't even remember what the exact question was now. I feel like I've rambled on for so long. But it was about the Mega Drive collection, and I think where to get started. And if you can start looking for games that kind of match the criteria for what you are interested in. Whether it is unique, whether you are just looking for single player games that you can enjoy on your own. The Haunting being a fantastic example of a single player game that is really unique, and that sense of humor is really obvious as you play through it. So yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been an absolute blast having you. Thanks for hanging around, and until next time, stay tuned for some more Leftover Culture review, where we will probably be reviewing Body Count on the Sega Mega Drive. Cheers, guys.